thank you very much for that nice introduction, Griff. The foundation is uniquely blessed to have had Griff's leadership and now to have my dear friend Rogers Wade coming on board. It's a great combination. That and the addition of one of the brightest, most talented, most lovely people I've ever known or worked with, and that's Miss Amy Bilski, who joined the staff and worked with me in 2 campaigns and is a tremendous addition, as are all the members of the staff. I was thinking on the way over here today, a couple things actually. You know, isn't it a shame when they passed the income tax, they didn't make the due date February 29th? We don't have to go through this once every 4 years instead of once a year, but that's a real shame. I would like to begin today by telling you a story. I think all speeches should begin with a story. About 10 years ago, on April 15th, on the beaches of Georgia's Sea Island, a second grader, public school teacher, a taxpayer, and Michael Gates, and a teenage single lady were walking down the beach. And they came upon a bottle that looked something like an Aladdin's lamp, and they picked it up. And they rubbed it, and out came a genie. And the genie said, "My goodness, there are 5 of them. But I've been in this bottle for 2,000 years. You've extricated me. Whatever I can do to repay you, I'd love to. Whatever your wish is, just tell me and I will grant it." And the genie looked down to the second grader, and the second grader said, "I just hope that I'm a senior in high school. My state will pay for my college education." And the genie turned to the teacher and said, "What would you like?" And she said, "Well, I'm retiring in 15 years. And I just hope that when I'm there, Georgia's finally made it in teacher pay and we're no longer 47th, but we're in there with everybody else." And then looked over the taxpayer and said, "Well, what would you like?" Said, "I just wish they'd get the burden of financing schools off of real estate and property and spread it across all Georgians, because it's important that everybody pay, and I just can't take anymore." Then the genie turned to Michael Gates and said, "Michael, what would you like?" And Michael said, "I just hope some state somewhere 10 years from now is putting computers in every classroom, so I'll have a lot of people to sell computers to." And then the genie looked over at the teenage girl who had had a vision and realized that she was going to become pregnant, be single, and 10 years from that day have a 4-year-old child and 2 jobs to support that child. Now, if that had really happened and those questions had been asked, you would have thought it was a joke. Because 10 years ago, Georgia was 46th in teacher pay. 10 years ago, there was no Hope Scholarship. 10 years ago, except for the most affluent systems, there were no computers in classrooms. And 10 years ago, the ad valorem tax funded every penny of education from M&O to construction, at least at the local level. And 10 years ago, we would have never thought that 26% of the children born in 1997 would be born to teenage unwed mothers. Those children who at the age of 4 would have the opportunity to go to a pre-kindergarten program and hopefully get a leg up on a hand they'd been dealt that didn't give them a hand up early in life. Education, I don't believe in astrology or comets, either one. But if it were true, then all the right moons are in all the right houses in terms of education in Georgia in 1997. We have a window of opportunity. We have a governor who's done a very unbelievable thing. Governor Miller delivered on every promise he made and every promise I made when I ran against him when it comes to public education. I told somebody the other day, I said, if you want to know the truth, and I said, I've said this before, I say it again, I still wish I had been elected governor of Georgia in 1990, but had that happened, I could have only hoped to have accomplished as much as Zell Miller has accomplished when it comes to public education. His chapter in history is written, and the biggest challenge whoever the next governor of Georgia is going to have is to sustain what Zell Miller has done. Secondly, great credit goes to the General Assembly in those areas because the General Assembly has spared education from its partisan purity on all other issues and has come together in most cases to fund teacher pay and to fund the improvements and to give the latitude for us to achieve. And lastly, and probably most importantly, is the Georgia voter and taxpayer who went to the polls and passed a constitutional amendment to allow themselves to vote again to tax themselves. And on the 17th of March, levied $3.5 billion on taxes on themselves to be spent in the next 5 years to fund construction of schools in Georgia, an amount of money that is twice what was raised to put on the 1996 Olympics, an amount of money that exceeds by $1.1 billion the amount of money that was spent on all education in Georgia in the public schools just 10 years ago. So when you talk about the state of public education, the state of public education could not be better from a foundation and an infrastructure and an opportunity standpoint. Second, from a human resource standpoint, we also have all the right moons and all the right houses if you're into that sort of thing. We have a brilliant chancellor in Stephen Porch who has brought about a new energy in the university system, a level of cooperation and collaboration second to none. We have a superintendent of public schools in Linda Srinko that brings the unique experience of a classroom teacher, an author, and a practical person, not held back by a lifetime in the bureaucracy, but instead energized by a lifetime in the classroom, and a person whose practical application to the fundamentals of reading, the basics of education, and the needs of teachers are moving Georgia ahead at a rapid rate. And Ken Breeden in adult and technical education, where we now have 3 collaborative leaders who are working together to find where whatever will work for the best interest of children, Georgia's going to do it. So education could not be in better shape. We could not have a better foundation from which to build. But I want to talk today about 3 things. First of all, I want to tell you what I see to it as my role, and not one that was assigned to me, because, by the way, I have to tell you all that when Governor Miller called me last November and went to my office, it was about 8:30 in the morning, the receptionist said, "Johnny, the governor's on the phone, he'd like to talk to you." And I went to the phone and said, "Tony, how are you doing?" Because Tony Brown makes all of his calls. I know he doesn't make them. And this deeper voice comes on, and Zell says, "Johnny, this is Zell." I said, "Well, Governor, good morning." He said, "Listen, I've got something really important I want you to do." And I figured they'd gotten a last-minute call. Some Republican was flying into the airport, and they wanted to send somebody out to meet him. So I figured I didn't have anything to do. You know, I was without portfolio, so I'd go out there and do it. And I was about to think some reason why I couldn't do that. And he said, "Listen, you know, I've asked all the school board to resign, and most all of them have quit, and I want to appoint you to that, and I want you to be chairman." Well, I sat there for a second. I said, "Yeah, right. You know, that's exactly, there's got to be a trick to this." And so I said, "Well, let me think about it." And I went home over the weekend, and I thought about it, and I was flattered by the opportunity, but very frankly, I called him on Monday, and I said, "Governor, I really appreciate the opportunity, but," and he interrupted me, and he stopped, and he said, "Listen, I'm at the mansion. If you're going to tell me no, you're going to tell it to my face. Come on over here." So I got in the car, and I rode over there. He said, "What's the problem?" And I said, "Well, I'm not real sure about this." I said, "I've been in politics a long time, and if 6 is a majority, 5 equals 0, and I don't know who else is going to be on this board." He said, "Well, let's sit down and figure out who's going to be on it." And we sat right there, and we figured out who was going to be on the board. So I realized then that you'd have the critical energy you need, which is a majority of the votes if you need them, to really do something. I said, "Well, you know, another thing about this, Governor," I said, "you know, there's a lot of problems, and I don't know what all of them are, but I just don't know whether we need to tackle this, and, you know, I'm just not real sure." He said, "Listen," he said, "you take this, we'll appoint these people, y'all go down there," and he said, "I will support whatever you do as long as it's in the best interest of children." He said, "I won't call you, you call me if you need something." So I knew that he was serious, and when you really think about it, if you figure the guy who'd done the lottery, done pre-kindergarten, who'd done technology, the guy who'd funded teacher pay to now be 26th in the nation from 46 just 10 years ago, who obviously had some thoughts about the one missing link was a State Board of Education in harmony, there's nothing he could do about it, then I realized he was serious. So we on the board, all 11 of us, new members and old members, have taken our job very seriously. And we're all about doing a few things which I'd now like to engage you with in the few minutes I have. Number one, you'll never hear me talking about what's bad about public education in Georgia. The biggest problem we've got in education in Georgia right now is the only thing people want to talk about or write about is what's wrong with it. Sure, there's some problems here and there, but the problem is people have a false perception about education in Georgia. You ask where Georgia stands in education, the first thing most people say is we're 49th, because that's where we are in SAT scores. Well, if you like to compare apples and oranges, that's true. But of the systems in the United States of America that test more than 60% of their students, we're 15th. And Massachusetts is first. And their average is 1011, and ours is 961. We're less than 5% behind number one. Yes, North Dakota's first. Their average SATs are 1195, and they tested 138 kids last year. We tested 38,000. So let's compare apples to apples. The truth of the matter is we're growing 11 points in the last 3-year running average improvement in SAT scores in Georgia. In fact, the second day after I was appointed chairman of the school board, the national survey came out, ranked Georgia 4th in the nation in educational improvement. I called Zell up and I said, see what a good job we're doing, been on the job 2 days. But I make that statement because I know that regardless of how good a job we're doing, our permanent grade as educators will always be an incomplete, because education is a process. One of the great problems that those who come into education to fix it have is they want to give it a shot, 2 days later have it all be well and go off. Well, we won't know whether we did a good job in education as far as our board's concerned until 2010. That's when this year's kindergarten student graduates. Only then will we really know. But that's not an excuse not to do more. But it is a message to those quick fix artists who come in, find one thing wrong and say, I can fix it, and then want to turn around and leave. Second thing about education I want to talk about is the opportunity we have with the local option sales tax. I think almost every superintendent in the state was at a meeting yesterday which I attended, and I'm going to repeat exactly what I told them. We have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity in terms of the funding of education that if they mess it up, we will never have again. That $3.5 billion and 1% for construction is a windfall for education, and it is a windfall for the taxpayer. I don't know how many of you realize this, but when 5 years from now, when that $3.5 billion is spent on school construction or bond debt reduction, it will have saved the taxpayers of Georgia $2.1 billion. Because had we not had the 1%, they would have had to sell bonds, and they would have paid back 60% of the principal and interest alone over 20 years. We saved $2.1 billion in interest. But those 63 systems that got that 1% tax must be great stewards of that money in the next 5 years. They must make sure that every system gets $1.10 for every dollar paid. We can't slip up. There are those who would just love to find some slip somewhere and then become the campaigners against referendums and then defeat them and all of a sudden lose what was the first opportunity in a century to spread the burden of financing education on all who benefit, and by alleviating the property tax from the most expensive and largest expenditure of government. Somebody asked me, why in the world did I go out to 17 different systems and campaign for 17 different referendums when I could have gone to 66, but I didn't have the time? And I said, because this is the single most important vote in the history of Georgia. I know it as a taxpayer. I know it as being involved in education. And to the superintendents and to the local boards of education and to all those involved in these construction projects and debt repayment projects, my message is that we have an opportunity that we will never have another chance at again. And we must do everything we can to maximize the return on this, and forever educational improvement in Georgia will be improved. Now, for just a second, and in conclusion, I want to talk about a few other issues which I want to start getting the message out on. I've already told you that you're not going to hear anything negative about education from me, because education by its nature is positive. It is the way out of poverty for the poor. It's the way to enrichment for those students that are gifted. It is the solution to most of our problems. It is not by coincidence that the two largest expenditures in government are for education and AFDC. My hope one day is that that will still be true, but that AFDC will go from $3 billion to $1 billion, and education from $5 billion to $7 billion. Once we've done that, you'll pay less taxes because we'll be more productive. And those few that will be on justifiable, needed welfare will have better role models to see to take themselves out of poverty and into success. My hope for the future in education is that we become enlightened as elected officials and do things like Kathy Ash and Clay Land tried to do this year in terms of the expansion of the charter school. The charter schools in Georgia, in their infancy, have done well. The first one in this state is in this county. It now, for the first time, has measurable results, all of which are up. Charter schools are an opportunity to solve the single biggest problem in Georgia and in public education. Most people will tell you the new problem of the day is ADD, attention deficit disorder. That's wrong. The only problem education has is PDD, parental deficit disorder. That's the problem with education. We have too many kids growing up in families with only one parent. We have too many kids growing up in families with two parents, none of who are engaged, all who have 999 ways to fix education but don't have the time to go to the school. Now, don't anybody quote me as knocking parents, because 15 to 20% of our parents do a great job. I look at Otis Brumby over there. I'd hate to be an Otis Brumby child and bring home a B. Otis knows what they're doing. He's involved in what they're doing. He cares about what they're doing. And I know all of you in this room do too. But we've got to start energizing everybody else. It takes a family to raise a child. Taxpayers have to reclaim a child if they're lost, and they're lost by a family. And we've got to get families more engaged in the educational process, more engaged in their children, more engaged in supporting that school. Listen, if you think you have a hard job, and I know a lot of you, I don't care what you do, you don't have anything close to what a public school teacher has to do. It is the toughest job, bar none, in our society. It is a job that goes mostly thankless and mostly criticized. And many of the products sent to those public school teachers today, the parents or the parent, if the child has one that they know of, expects them not only to educate them but to raise them. And if the teacher tries to correct them, more often than not, the parent sides with the child, not the teacher. We have got to turn around the way we participate in education as parents and be positive role models to ensure they get more involved in schools and give the support to the teacher and look to the student to achieve, rather than just hope the student will do all right and hope the teacher brings them through. Our Board of Education, the new Board of Education, has done some things in the last few weeks which I hope are indicative of I know are indicative of our approach to public education. And in a thoughtful body like this, I want to tell you what they are, because they are remarkably different from governmental approaches in the past. First of all, we have taken a cause and effect approach, which means we are not going to buy every new age idea that comes down the pipe. I've been through new math, continuous progress, and open classrooms. I didn't understand new math. Continuous progress was subjective, and open classrooms were chaos. But all my children were educated during the era of those new age ideas. I believe, as Linda Srinko believes, if you teach a child to read and comprehend, they can do anything they want to do. But if they can't read and compute and comprehend, they'll not be able to do anything. And she is to be commended for reading first and fundamental commitment to the basics in K through 3, as is Zell Miller to be commended for the 4-year-old pre-K kindergarten program. And as is this Board of Education to be commended for not falling for new age ideas, but instead being practical. We raised standards at our February board meeting. Georgia freshmen entering this year will have to have 4 years of math, not 3 years of math, to graduate with a college prep diploma. They'll have to have 22 Carnegie units to graduate in the core curriculum instead of 21 Carnegie units. They'll have to go to class 30 minutes longer. But we didn't buy this new age idea of 24 Carnegie units and 14 hours a day in school and some of these people that have confused time with accomplishment, and we did something else. We said, listen, what's so magic about high school? What's wrong with 8th grade? If in fact we are having difficulty in math, why not encourage math in the 8th grade at the high school level? And we went to the Board of Regents, and they agreed, and starting next year, for those students that enter 8th grade and take algebra in the 8th grade, the university system is going to count it as a Carnegie unit towards high school graduation. So they can take 5 years of mathematics in high school and middle school, not just 3 years to graduate. And we put in an 11th grade algebra, a math test, not because we like testing, but because if it makes sense, if you're going to require a 4th year, let's be practical. Test them in the 11th year, so when they schedule for that last year in high school, it's in the area of math they're the weakest. What's the result going to be? It's going to be better SAT scores, it's going to be better students, and it's good, solid, practical thinking. Now, secondly, and Griff knows this probably as well as anybody in this room, except for my many friends in the legislature, I did pay a lot of attention to the budget in the legislature. It was always fun to figure that out because it was so thick most people didn't want to, so you could really pull the wool over people's eyes pretty fast if you knew more about it than they did. So I tried to know enough of the code words, enough of the line items to where I could talk about it. But one thing that we did, and we initiated it really at the April meeting, which I hope is going to change the philosophy in terms of education and its financing, is the governor wrote us and said we've got a problem. SIA funding is growing 16% a year. It's gone from a $980,000 appropriation in 1987 to a $104 million appropriation in 1997. If you do your math real quick, that's $103 million. Growing 16% a year, enrollment's growing 0.5% to 3.5%. Most time, and legislators know this, when you have a problem like that, you put an arbitrary cap on it. That's all legislators can do. That's all the governor can do. Or worse, you line item veto it because it's out of control. We just took the following approach. We announced at last Thursday's meeting and yesterday told all the superintendents it's out of control, and we have some idea where the problems are, but I tell you what, you guys are doing your scheduling, you're doing your FTE count, which is, for those that don't understand that, governmentese is the number of students in school count. You're doing your budget. All that's due either August 15th or October 1st of next year. So I tell you what, we've got a problem. Some systems are getting more money than appropriately they should. It's a formula-driven system. Y'all need to get in there, correct it. But this October, when your budgets come in, if we're still out of line, then this State Board of Education is going to go to each individual system, pick the ones that look like they may have a problem, and we're going to demand the test achievement scores and all the criteria used to put the children in SIA. You see, there's always been a fundamental attitude in education in Georgia for so many years when you had to fight for every dollar you could get, that you were in the procurement business, which meant when the legislature met, it was how much of the pie you could get. We must fundamentally change our attitudes about that. We have a large share of the pie now, and just as in the case of the 1% local option, where we must be right on target in how we spend the money. We must give 105 cents for every 100 cents invested by the taxpayer. Then when we find programs that grow exponentially, we have to rein them in. Otherwise, they're taken away from us. So we put in a proactive management approach. I trust the superintendents of Georgia. And I trust, as I do in my business, that if I give somebody an early enough warning that we've got a problem and give them the opportunity to fix it, they'll have a better solution than I'll ever have. And I'll be willing to bet you that come next January in the budget, the growth rate in SIA is not 16% anymore. And I'll take no credit for that whatsoever. The credit will belong where the credit's due, and that's to the superintendents of Georgia. So what I'm trying to say is this: the state of education in Georgia could never be better. When you leave here, I hope you'll talk positive about schools. If your company's a partner in education, I hope you'll not only send money, but you'll do what Hank McCamish does. You'll get constructively involved, just as he's done at Reinhardt, just as many of you have done in public schools around this state. If you're a parent, I hope you'll redouble your effort. If you're a parent who lives next door to another parent that never goes to a PTA meeting, only complains about the schools, I hope you'll call their hand on it I hope you'll get them involved, because that is the single solution to the last remaining problem that exists in Georgia. Just think about it. If we can turn peer pressure from what it is to being positive in Georgia about education, then there is no limit to what we can do and what we can achieve. So I conclude by saying this. I want to thank this body for its great work it did last year on the ranking of public schools. Many of the things I have talked about were things that were reflected in those rankings, in the schools that did well and the schools that did poorly. Money is not the common denominator, but it is fundamentally essential, and Georgia has the funding, Georgia has the right people in place, and Georgia has the best kids in this country. And I will submit to you that the title of this speech is The State of Education in Georgia. And the answer to that question is the state of education in Georgia is great. And we need to tell that story wherever we go. What few problems we have, we need to fix. And then we need to reach for the stars, because this is the state of the 21st century. And our children are going to have a 21st century education if I have anything to do with it. Thank you very much. How much time am I supposed to take for questions, Chris? Okay. Anybody got any questions? Oh, gosh. Not this group. Yes, Chuck?
Give us sort of an update. What you hear constantly is the overwork of paper, just the paper trail. What are you all doing, and what kind of policies you see implementing to hopefully continue to free up more time? That's one complaint we hear over and over and over.
Well, I think the department and Superintendent Srinko, and I see Bud Gill. I think I see Bud. I don't have my glasses. Is that Bud? Yeah, okay, I do see Bud. The form was the same, but I couldn't see all the details. But the department has done a good job, I think, in the last 3 years of doing that. Educators, by their nature, though, you give them a problem, they'll create a form. You have to watch them, I'm going to tell you that. But we're trying very hard to do that. I think what I said to the superintendent yesterday on this SIA situation, the old solution used to be put some kind of arbitrary cap and send them a form to fill out to prove they did it. What we're going to do instead is just review their budgets as they come in and their FTE count. We're going to look for where there may be a problem, then we're going to go to that problem area and take a look at it. I think that's really the way you manage a business. You know, in my branch offices, when I got one that's just knocking them dead, they don't see me around there, and I certainly don't send them forms to fill out. I go to the one that's in the black, in the red, and I'm over there seeing what I can do to help make it better. And that's kind of our approach to managing education. But the department has done a good job, and I give Linda and all the people in the department a lot of credit for that. And also, as we get better and better utilization of the computer, we're going to have better and better opportunity to go from paper to technology, which will be a big help. But I never lose that perspective, because it was a terribly burdensome paperwork situation not too long ago. Yes, Kelly.
The last couple of years, we've gotten rid of the half test and the curriculum-based assessments. Where are we heading as far as the testing system?
Well, I think where we're heading is what the board decided to do. We did away with the CBAs, and we're writing a new assessment test, which will begin in the school year of 1998, the same year that the new quality core curriculum goes in place. The test is designed to be curriculum and student specific, so when you get a test, you don't get a percentage as reference to a norm, you get your student as reference to the other students. I think that's what most parents really want to know, is how is my child doing. Secondly, Linda is on the right track on a number of things. One is her hope and desire to make that test more segmented, so pieces of it can be given during the term of the year through the use of technology, so it can be closer in proximity to the time of the accomplishment of whatever subject matter in the core curriculum it might be. I think her vision on that is extraordinary, because you're going to hear, you know, one thing, life really is not as complicated as people make it. If you look at test scores today, people will tell you Georgia students are doing horrible in social studies. Well, they're right. Our kids are doing horrible in social studies, but there's one reason they are. The CBA test on social studies doesn't correspond with when the kids are taking the subject, so they're being tested on things before they've had the subject. Well, I'd do pretty bad too if I hadn't had the subject yet. And so we blame it on the poor kid when it's just out of sync testing with curriculum. And the ability to segment that test and give it, particularly with the advent of things like block scheduling, which allows far more credit units to be earned and more diversity in curriculum, but because testing is generally given once a year, tests sometimes are more removed from the time of instruction, and you have a natural fall off in scores. I always did better the night after I studied rather than 2 months later. I mean, that doesn't take a rocket science to figure that. So where we're going in testing is segmenting so you can give it at different times, not all at once, greater use of technology, more student-specific assessment to both the curriculum as well as in comparison to their peers in that school, not a norm reference to a group of people somewhere else in America. Yes?
You talked about the success of charter schools in Cobb County. What is your plan of action to ensure that we're going to have a good charter school law next year?
Well, I spoke for both Kathy Ash's bill and Clay Land's bill, which I think died because of suspicion, not good thought, which is one thing we have to be aware of. There are a lot of people that think they've got all the answers in education, or that their answer is the only answer, and the legislature was very guarded in making sure that while expanding charter school law, it didn't open the opportunity to have it taken advantage of by somebody who thought they had a singular answer in terms of methodology or resource. But I think once they back up, now that this session is over, and realize that save passing an expansion in charter schools, this was the greatest educational year in history for Georgia. I never remember a time where the superintendent's main legislation, which was the safety legislation, which dealt with a major concern, it passed. The budget, the biggest fight over money in the budget was over VOAG lab money, and that wouldn't make a wave in the ripple of the budget. It's a small item. Used to, we fought over billions of dollars. They were fighting over, I think, 3.8 million. I mean, that's just, we've gone light years ahead. So save passing a quality charter school law. And by quality law, I mean what we need. Georgia's law is so tight now, it doesn't allow, for example, a new school to start as a charter school. Only an existing school can convert to a charter. Both Kathy and Clay's bill allowed a new school to start as a charter. There were those who were afraid that it would be public money going to a private institution. It was the reverse. It was the encouragement of private investment in a public institution. And that's where the rhetoric got off base during the session, and unfortunately that bill lost. It could not have had two better sponsors than Kathy and Clay, and I think that once the dust settles and everybody looks to next year, you'll see a bill like that passed. And I think charter schools are a major opportunity for the future. You know, I believe that every parent in Georgia has a choice in terms of education. They can choose to homeschool, they can choose public school, or they can choose private school. I feel like my job is to make sure that public school is not only the best choice, but it's the right choice. And as we afford better opportunities for constructive engagement like charter schools, it will be an even better choice in the future than it is today. Yes?
The Georgia Assembly recently passed HB 393, which I know you're aware of, mandates the state board to incorporate character curriculum by this fall. And I was wondering what your approach to that was going to be.
Well, we're going to do whatever the legislature says. I never thought I'd hear somebody subject to the legislature say that. We're going to do whatever. We never thought they did that when I was there. We're going to certainly carry that out, and I think character and values and all those things are. And you would be pleased to know how much time is spent in curriculum in thinking. I mean, these educators really do think about what they're doing. I think a lot of people think they just buy a book and throw it on the table and whatever the book says is what they do. That is not true. I have been very amazed at the integration of curriculum with current events, with current issues, with using it as not just something you teach and memorize, but with something that you learn. So it won't be hard to do it all. Our desire at the State Department of Education is to see to it that when every senior graduates from high school, they have an education that allows them to make the right choices and the intellect and the capacity to make the judgments that confront them in life. And part of that whole situation is a fundamental association with the benefits of character, responsibility, integrity, things like that, which is why I say again, PDD is a big problem in Georgia. The more parental involvement you have, the more times the parent reinforces the fact that the teacher did the right thing to give you a demerit if you were late for class. The more, and that's really Mickey Mouse. I mean, we have much bigger discipline problems than that, and it seems like to me some of the most egregious also have the most aggressive parents defending the kid. When I was in school, the punishment I feared wasn't what the teacher did to me, it's what my father was going to do to me once I got home, found out what the teacher had done. If we had a little bit more of that, I think we'd have a lot less problem in public education. Yes?
Johnny, thank you for your comments this morning. The education system, I think, does give us all a lot of positive things to share.
Thank you.
A question that's a genuine, sincere question and concern is that, as you pointed out, the monies, the budget available for the school system is the largest item in our overall state budget. And there are substantial dollars being spent. From teachers you talk to and other people that are familiar with the education system, they seem to have a concern that, gosh, there seems to be a bloated administration system. There seems to be dollars that are being spent that are not being spent very well. And gosh, we have a tremendous need for additional programs you've shared with us. What thoughts have you given with regard to an analysis or a study of that area, at least to try to find some places where dollars can be reduced in terms of being available to the positive programs like these directors?
You're getting ready to get more than you bargained for. And I'll just conclude with this because I think the time is about up. Wonderful question. Dr. Benjamin is still here. Is Dr. Benjamin still here? It's our new superintendent in Cobb County. He's still here. They are right. The administration of education is too big, and there are two reasons for it. I'm one of them. Every legislator in here that served in the General Assembly for 15 or 20 years is one of them, and so too are the superintendents, and so too are those very teachers. And I'm going to just give you a real honest answer. The solution's in place, but it's going to take a few years to fix. Linda Srinko has reduced, and I forget the exact number, but I think it's from 500 to 358 or something like that in terms of the number of people at the State Department, which is what you're talking about. That's the administration of education. But let me tell you the honest answer. The legislature for years would never raise the teacher's salary schedule after 15 years, nor would it lower the incentive to retire less than 30 years. So when a teacher had taught for 15 years, there was no financial incentive to teach for the next 15 years other than cost of living. They got no raises at all. So your very best educators to keep them in education were put in administration. Now this I think is a very true statement. Some may argue with me, but you know, economic policy ends up causing people results. And people do follow the money. I mean, and good people follow the money, and they should. That's what capitalism is all about. And you can be entrepreneurial about education as well as you can about making widgets. So we got bureaucratic about it, not entrepreneurial about it, and we were rewarding administration and not really rewarding teaching. And I'm not being critical of administrators. They were just victims of the circumstance that we created. Now, Clay Land and Kathy and Skin Edge, and Skin was a great leader in this. In administration, we changed tenure laws a couple years ago. So now that people who went to administration for money, if they change disciplines, they lose tenure, which means there's more accountability. And that was the right move. And you have very smart people. I mean, what Dr. Benjamin did in Nashville, Tennessee is the example of what he's going to do in Georgia. Our superintendents today are better business people than they were 10 or 15 years ago. And I think you will see commensurate reductions in administration at the county levels, the system levels. But unfortunately, just like when we did away with involuntary separation in Georgia, we did away with it a long time ago. Problem is, a lot of people that were in it were young, and they're just now getting separated, and you still have abusive pensions in the newspaper. because you can't take away under the Constitution a contractual right. Well, you can't take away contractual rights of employment that these administrators had either, i.e. their pension plan, etc. But 10 years from now, that'll be over. I mean, you won't, because Governor Miller, again, this was one of my promises he delivered on, by the way, which was to lift the cap on the L5 step on the salary schedule. Once we did that, then there was an incentive to stay in the classroom. And as long as we support the teachers in the classroom, there'll be less of a resource of people wanting to go to the administration for the money. I kind of like Jerry Maguire, show me the money. Let's show it to them in the classroom, not in the administration. Not that you don't pay administrators well, you just don't have to pay as many of them as well. And let's pay teachers well, and you won't have that going anywhere. But I will submit to you, you are 100% correct that more money is spent on the administration of education than should be. And the fault of that is some mentality, some legislature, and some historical. And one of the things in our approach to look at a problem area and get the superintendents to focus on it and ask them to bring the solutions that we have done in SIA, that's one of the things we'll do in people management and human resources as time goes on too. And I think that's a very correctable situation without being punitive. You know, in corporate America, the downsizing is pictured as being punitive, and certainly, you know, it's a recession when your neighbor loses his job, it's a depression when you lose yours. It's all a matter of perspective. But in education, that downsizing can take place at the administrative level through attrition and through benefiting from the incentives to stay in the classroom, which are now being realized by the salary schedule. But you have one other thing that's helping us too. We've got a growing public school system. There are 1.3 million kids in the public schools of Georgia. So if we kept the administrative level, human resources wise, where it is the next 10 years in terms of actual numbers, just as a ratio as the growth goes up, it will reduce in its proportion of what's spent as well. So yes, it's a problem, and part of it was created by the legislature, part of it by the monolithic institution of education that used to exist, but that's moving away now, and I think over time you'll see a larger percentage going into the classroom, a smaller percentage going into administration, which is where we ought to be moving. I said the last one, but I can't let J.B. Horn raise his hand. I can't see facial features, but there's only one body that has a silhouette like that. And it's got to be a short question. This is not church, J.B. There are two answers. I do think year-round schools make a lot of sense, but I think that decision must be made at the local level by the local superintendent and the local board. We do not need the state deciding to do that. What works in an urban area might not work in an agribusiness area or a rural area, but that should be a local decision, which I'm big on. I think we at the state need to encourage the local systems to bring us new creative ideas, not subject them to some new creative idea we have and then try to make one size fit all. That's one of the problems in education. You've had people have the approach that one size should fit all. It should not. And it's up to the local elected boards, the local superintendents to meet that demand, and certainly in an urban area, year-round schools might be a solution. Secondly, this is where parental deficit disorder comes in. They need to support efforts like you in your church to have school-age student-based programs so there are not idle minds. And we have to remember as parents, as that son stays up longer, that those minds should not be idle, and that's not public education's responsibility. That's the responsibility of the parents or the mentors or those of us that will be the new partners in education in the 21st century. So I support year-round schools providing a local system asks for it. I'm never going to try and impose it on them. And I support organizations like yours that afford afternoon daycare and enriching activities for a kid to be involved in rather than the streets. that is the long-term solution. Thank you very much for having me.